Okay, today will be my first review of an audio amplifier on my channel. This is the SMSL A1. This is, if you ask me, a very unique one, and I want to share with you my thoughts on it. So I'm Richard and welcome to Zappy Productions. This is the SMSL A1 and I wanted to share with you my review. I want to start this off with this amp because this is a Class A amp and at this size. Now, you'll be wondering what is so special, right? Class A, there are Class A in the market. But have you ever seen a Class A of this size that costs only about 550 USD or 800 Sing dollars? This is probably one of the most affordable true Class A amplifier you can get in the market. Now, there are amplifiers such as Audio Labs, which is a Class AB and works in Class A in certain restrictions. While this only works in Class A and nothing else. So for a true Class A amp, this is one of a kind, at least in the price range of 550 USD or about 800 Sing dollars. Now, before I start, to say a bit about my speaker setup. So I do use, as you can see here, this is the Sennheiser A7. I reviewed it in my channel. I also have the Concept 300. I think you have already seen it in one of my other reviews. And I also have a Dali here. No, it's somewhere outside there. Show you a short video here. And together they form three speakers I have at home where I use. In my living room, I use mainly the A7. While I'm working, I use the Concept 300 bookshelf speakers. And they sound great. Connecting to these will be either the Chord Hugo TT or the SMSL SU6, which is a very good deck if you ask me. Other than it not being balanced, I think it sounds pretty much decent. Now, this amp, I want to talk about it a little bit because, well, Class A amp, you only produce 10 watts of power at 8 ohms, and that is probably what most speakers are. I mean, if you are using 4 ohm speakers, this goes up to 15 watt. Very little power if you're looking at numbers. But is it truly that little power? If you put in the perspective of a normal speaker like this Sennheiser A7 here, and you sit about 2 meters away, an average small room sitting size, you are looking at using this speaker at about 80 dB, slightly more, maybe 81 dB. And the reason is because if you use any louder, you will need more power, and it does ramp up quite a lot as you go higher. But the thing is, most of us don't really listen at 80 dB average that much, because 80 dB is kind of like standing in the middle of the city with all the cars whizzing past. That's 80 plus dB. It is quite loud. While we probably want to listen in a more comfortable zone, and that is probably 60, 70 plus dB. 60 dB is about the average conversation loudness, while 70 dB is somebody singing relatively loudly, and you are looking at instruments being played maybe a few meters away. So 70 dB is quite a comfortable amount of sound for a small room. In my room here, I cannot play past 85 dB because it will result in a lot of reflection. I have a lot of things that's absorbing sound, but there is a limit. And for my particular room, I can only go to maybe about 85 dB at the max anyway. So with this amp, it's just nice. With my Sennheiser A7, it does go all the way to about 81 dB without any issues at all. While if I'm using something like the Concept 300, well, I did notice that I never had distortion with it anyway. So that being said, 10 watt is actually more than enough if you are living in a small room and using a somewhat average efficiency speaker. Now, if you have a speaker that is even lower efficiency than the Sennheiser A7 here, which is I believe 86 measured. So, I mean, if you're using something like 80 dB efficiency, then maybe this amp is not for you. And if you are using something like Cliff, which is like 90 or 100 dB efficiency, this amp more than enough for you. So that's really about it in terms of power. Now, let's take a look at the amp itself. This is a very solid amp. I mean, this is one of the most solid amp I ever held anyway. It is really solid. It feels like, especially the top here, you can hear it's solid metal all around. Now, this amp itself has no other functions. It is only an amp and only an amp. No DAC, nothing. And as such, if you look at the back panel here, you can see this is the speakers. This is the RCA in, and then there's also a headphone out. And then power. There is literally nothing in this amp that distracts it from its job, which is amplifying sound. Now the thing I did notice is that these, I'll say as speaker ports are really close. And if you are using anything with a bigger plug, in fact I have one cable that has a bigger plug, the plugs may actually touch each other. And sometimes if you are using metal plugs, I think it will cause a little bit of problem. You short circuit the amp. So yeah, just note you have to use slimmer cables because this thing here, very close. Other than that, I think it's pretty okay. Nothing else is problematic. And this is one of the more premium line of amplifiers by SMSL. This is the A1 anyway. So it comes with spikes and it comes with pads. So you can use it and mount it anywhere you want. Now, being a Class A, it does get relatively warm. So in usage-wise, it does raise to about 45 degrees plus. Even in an aircon room, that is always maintained at about 24 degrees Celsius. So you are looking at an amp that goes as hot as 50 degrees Celsius in an aircon room. And in a no aircon room, it may actually go as about 52, 53. Do not worry, this is how a Class A amp should work. But I did notice that this amp do get hotter as you play louder. So, you know, just notice that there's actually temperature display in front, and just take note of it. Don't let it get too really damn hot. Other than that, I think it's pretty okay. It works out very nicely. And as I said, no special function in this amp, so plug and play and you are ready to go. Now I want to touch on something that I rarely touch on in many other devices, and that's remote controls. The SMSL A1 comes with one of the most premium looking controls. It's a pure metal one. The only controller that is actually nicer than this or better built than this is the one by Cord, which is also pure brush metal. While this one, I think I give it high points. For a 550 USD device, it comes with a controller better than my Cyrus one, which sucks. I mean, the controller is a piece of plastic. And in fact, most of the thousands of dollars item in this world won't have a controller better than this. So, something to note. The only problem is that it uses some of the specialized button, I think 2025 batteries. A bit unique compared to standard AA batteries that in most other controllers will use. Just note that the A1 can be controlled by any other SMSL amplifier controllers. It doesn't work with the DAC controllers. I tried the SML DAC controllers, it doesn't work. Amplifier wise, yeah, you can use one of the other amplifier controllers and control it pretty well. So if you don't want to use a small controller that is metal and stuff, I mean you want something easier to use and cheaper, the cheap controllers by other SMSL products will work out very well. Now back to the A1. Let's talk about the sound quality of this. And once again, I'm using either the A7, the Concept 500, or the DALI to verify the sound signature of this amplifier itself. So I have 3 speakers to give me a bit of perspective. To start off the sound quality, I will start with Soundstage. And I'll say as this is one of the wider ones that I have, at least with the amps I'm using. I'm using one Cyrus one. I'm using a specialized current amplifier called the M40 from China. That is actually really nice. In fact, I personally prefer that over the SMSL A1, but another story for another day. I also tried some cheap ones, and of course I tried many others in the showrooms. But that said, I think the A1 has a very nice wide soundstage that Cyrus one don't give. And in fact, I think this is one of the wider ones I ever heard. Even in a showroom, when you compare speakers placed at this same position. So I think in terms of soundstage, this does create a very nice wide soundstage itself. And now when it comes to details, this amp is very detailed. But I think the detail comes because it's a very balanced amplifier. Overall, there is no particular sound signature that is more, I would say, as obvious than others, more outstanding than others. As such, it's just very clean, reproducing the sound that it should do. And as such, all the details are very clear too. I'll talk about the bass later, you know, but I'll say as in terms of details, this amp is very detailed. Nothing overpowers the details in this amp. You can hear almost anything very nicely with the amplifier itself. Then when it comes to positioning of all these instruments and stuff, I did notice that it spreads out very widely into a front panel. Now, I'm not very sure. Some people prefer a bit of focus in certain instruments and certain spread out certain ones. I say as this amp just kind of spreads it all out. You can tell the position, but it's a relatively widespread in front of you. So nothing in your face and, you know, position right in the center kind of feel. Overall positioning spread all around. And then when it comes to the bass itself, I would say that the bass is very well controlled. At least among the amps I own, I think this has the most control, but it doesn't have the most impact nor the most depth. So if you are looking for impact and depth, I think there are amps that give you a bit more bass. But when it comes to control, when it should bang, it should bang. If not, it should be silent. The bass don't drag on more than it should. This amp is very, very good. And I think this is a very important thing, because I noticed that the A7, due to the way its port is designed and its driver and stuff, it does produce a very deep, strong bass. But for the other amps, yes, you get a bit more punch or you get a bit more power and depth, but you don't get as much control. I find with this amp it sounds the best because it controls the bass very well, and the A7 itself does already have the depth and the punch itself. So, you know, with the A7 and the A1 A series, the SMSL A1, it was one of the best combinations. I'll talk about the combination more later. Now when it comes to the mids wise, I think it gives a very spread out mids that is very clear, very smooth, very listener, nothing that is out of place to me. And considering that vocals is also in the mids region, I would say as vocals for this felt a little bit more airy, a bit more open than the other amps I used. Now, goes back to what I said just now regarding the whiteness and everything. I did notice that when it comes to vocals especially, you can notice it that it is not like strong and focused in the center. It doesn't have this very strong body that in some amps you have for vocals at least. It is like very nice, airily spread out. And I actually really enjoyed it for female vocals that are airy in nature, because it gives a very nice big sound for vocals themselves. And it also works on my A7 here, my Concept 300 there. Something that the other amps will usually tend to give a bit more body, a bit more focus, while this spreads out a bit more light, and I do enjoy it in certain ways. Now when it comes to the highs, I would say it's very detailed, no sibilance, no harshness, nothing weird going on there. Very clear, does extend as high as my speaker allow me to, and it does have slightly better clarity, at least compared to some of my other amps. But I don't think it's like truly better clarity, it's more like the highs just cut through a little bit better. And that's really about it for sound quality, I feel. The SMSL, as you can see so far, or you can hear so far, sounds really, really good. Now when it comes to pairing, I feel that it pairs best with my A7, while it probably doesn't pair that well with my Concept 300. And kind of with my DALI, which you don't see in the frame, it's an okay pairing. In fact, it may be a good pairing, depends on what kind of taste you like in your sound. The A7, as I said, has very strong bass, smooth top, and really nice mids. I find that the A1 does enhance those characteristics while still controlling the bass well. It doesn't give a very boomy sound, instead it gives a very controlled bass while still retaining the depth and the strength that the A7 has for the bass itself. And for the mids, well, it does spread the mid a bit wider now, and it gives a very nice airy feeling to it. Now it doesn't have the strongest body in the mids that some of you may want if you want like strength and power in the mids itself. I don't think this amp gives it, especially for vocals. I mean, I listen to songs from like Lisa or from Aimer, depends on how you pronounce it, and also songs from YOASOBI. I did notice that for female vocals especially, if you like the airy sound, this amp is for you. But if you want more body, more strength in the voice itself, then maybe this amp not so great. Maybe some other class of amps or some other type of amps may be a better match for you. Or if you have a speaker that is already very dispersed in nature, this may not be the amp for you too. You know, you don't want it to disperse even further. I mean, unless you really like super wide, focusless sound, and that is possible, like say in maybe the fine audios. The fine audio speakers are kind of like that. So that is really it for the mids. And while the highs wise, the A7 wasn't very well known for the highs, but I find that with this M, it brings out the extra little details, extra smoothness, and it feels overall better with this M itself. Now that's me, definitely. If you like the kind of sound signature that I have described so far, then this M is for you with the A7. Now with the Concept 300, I don't quite like it as much because the Concept 300, firstly, it has a very controlled bass already. Even unless your M really is bad, its bass is very well controlled, but it doesn't have the depth, doesn't have the power. And as such, I think my current M does drive my Concept 300 with more authority. This one is like, I'll say as, it feels more like effortless, while my other M's, the M440 that is not in the review today, has more authority with it. And when it comes to bass wise, the Concept 300 also is really quite spread out. It's not like a super focused mids. So this guy who spreads it out more, I think there is not much difference to it. Personal preference at that point in time. So I think for the mids, especially with this M, it does impart a little bit more smoothness. But yeah, the Concept 300 really sounds very good, so I don't think that really matters. So in that region, not a big deal. And in details, yes, this thing brings out a little bit more details there, but I think the bass is more important for me. So when it comes to the Concept 300, I prefer my other M's than the A1. And that's really for pairing itself. With the DALI, I feel that it kind of works. It brings in the bass and controls it better. It always have enough power to drive all the little drivers, so I think it's pretty good. Now, one of the best thing about this SMSL A1, however, is playing really, really soft. I noticed it. My other amps were like 100 watt amps or 150 watt amps, so when I play very low volume, they still sound good because they are good amps. They are not like the $50 cheap amps that I have here. I have a few $50 cheap amps there. It does work. But yes, these $1,000 amps do sound good at low volume. But the A1 sounds fantastic. It doesn't sound any different from the high volume, just lower. Everything is so balanced, everything is so well controlled still. I think maybe the circuitry, or maybe because it's a 10 watt amp, they try to make it as good as possible in this 10 watt region. I find that at low volume, this amp is like the best. At low volume means if you are playing like 70 dB type of sound, or maybe 65 dB, you want like a conversational level of music. This is fantastic. So overall, the SMSL A1, what do I feel about it? I think this amp is not for everybody. Let's face the fact, it is only 10 watt into 8 ohms, and I managed to overload it. In fact, the first few days there was some weird ass issue. I can let you hear this clip. I think it's because my pins were too close and the metal pins start touching each other and short circuiting it or whatever. But yeah, it does get overloaded. Not too hard if you jack up the volume high enough, especially with the A7. If I play to like 85 dB average and it peaks, sometimes you may hear some distortion. 86 dB, yeah, when it peaks. But that said, I think overall, if you are using it in the small room, you are not intending to play extremely loud, I think this amp will work out very nicely. And if you are a near field listener, like listen within a meter or two, I think this amp is totally for you. If your room is really huge, I mean you're going to listen like 4 meters away, no, don't get this amp, because if you just want to listen at 75 dB in an average sensitive speaker like this, it may already reach the limit once it starts going loud, and you don't want that to happen. So I think this amp is ready for people who live in small spaces, or listen near field, or listen soft. Now, I know some of you guys that listen or been reviewing or watching these reviews live in much bigger houses, and as such, I really don't recommend A1 in those scenarios, because you may easily set it too loud, require too much power, and the amp overloads. So I don't think that's a good thing. Now, there's one more thing I want to touch on, is that this amp does get really, really warm. You cannot put anything on it. It has to be the top of the amp, and it's not very big, so I think it's okay for most times. But yeah, it does get very warm, and I'll say it's not very comfortable to touch it when it gets really warm. So it's something to note also. Overall, I think this amp is really for those people who are looking for something different. I think this cannot be your first amp because its flexibility is quite limited, especially if you live in any bigger space than my room. By the way, my room is like 4 meter by 4 meter kind of space. So if you live anything bigger than that and you sit more than 3 meters away from the speakers, I highly don't recommend you this. In fact, any other Class D amps or AB amps like the Audiolab 6000, I believe, and then my M40 I'll review in the future, or maybe any Class D good ones, or even the Toping amps may be a better choice, especially if you are starting out this hobby. Even though this is cheap, I won't say it's like dirt cheap, but affordable. This is not something that I recommend you to start off with. But I think this is a really nice flavor to high-end Class A audios, because normally those cost 3 to 4 times the price, and this pretty good. So really that's about it. My review of the SMSL A1, and I personally recommend it if you listen low, listen in a small room, have sensitive speakers. As long as you meet any one of these requirements, I can recommend you this. But if you don't meet any of these requirements, I really don't think this is for you. That's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will review more amplifiers, so do like and subscribe if you are interested to listen. I'll talk about my Cyrus one, I'll talk about my M40, I'll talk about some cheap China amps, and most likely I'll review even more amplifiers in the future within the maybe $1,000 to $2,000 range. I probably won't go into the 3, 4, 5K range because I find that those are really personal preference at that point in time. But I want to find those really good gems at this $1,000 to $2,000 range, which is something beyond normal. I would say as non-audiophile spending. This is like 1,000 to 2,000 is probably what I feel is audiophile level spending. You know, something that you won't like just suddenly buy because it still costs money, but not too expensive that it cannot be bought and tested out, or I cannot find it secondhand easily. And that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this short little review, and see you next time. Bye bye.